Okay, good morning, everyone. It's 10:35 Mountain Time, so I'm gonna get started with the lesson. Today, just like a kind of heads up of how it's gonna go, gonna be a little bit of us discussing JavaScript, what we know so far, then some independent time of you that you can kind of use however you see fit. If you're like, I want to get to know the history of JavaScript. What kind of programming language is JavaScript? Some people say object oriented, some people say functional. What does that mean? What's the deal with that? Um, Maybe you're like, I want to just get a JavaScript file loaded up. I want to write some JavaScript and load it up in my project and see it run in the browser. Like, whatever you want to do, there's going to be like basically some 30 minutes independent time, maybe 40. You can go through the lesson. You can go through, like, you can look at the front end programs lesson if you want. It's going to be up to you. So this is like workshop time, independent study, and then we're going to come back together. We're going to hear from some of you what you learned in that time, what you found cool, what you're still have questions about, and then I think the best way to learn something new is just like solving a problem in the language. So we'll pair at the end of the hour and a half. And I've got two challenges at the bottom of the lesson page. Challenge one, less spicy. Challenge two, a little bit spicy. And you're going to like approach those challenges with your pair. Um, and you can do that like either with a JavaScript file, or you could do that in the browser console, because that's like a fun thing about JavaScript is you can just run it in any web page that you're on and see if it runs, or more likely if you're like me, you get an error. Yeah, hopefully that sounds all right. And yeah, so let's open it up. What do y'all know about JavaScript so far? What intrigues you? Do you have a question about it right off the bat? Where are you at with this programming language?
That Java is short term for JavaScript, right? It's the same thing, right?
That is correct. Quaz on it. Um, Moving on. No, that is not correct. Let me just say that out loud. I think Adam had his hand up first.
Yeah, I'm kind of scared of it, mostly because I heard that it will like coerce types into other things or like interpret things for you, and instead of like airing out like Ruby and being like, I can't do that, JavaScript like, I'll do that, and you just have to kind of know what it's going to turn something else into.
Yeah, that's that's like one way to think about it. Comparisons are a little awkward with JavaScript. Basically, what I'll say about that, if you're doing comparisons as part of like a conditional, always use triple equals. Double equal, people are double equal, not always going to give you the functionality you might expect. But yeah, it has the ability to like coerce some types, and it just works sometimes when you think it shouldn't, and you're like, come on, like you got to have more rules than this. But it's more Wild West like. Okay, Ben, go ahead.
My question is in the terms of like a language being static or dynamic, where does JavaScript fall in? Because I know there's like data types and some of like some rigid structures, but it also seems like it could be kind of dynamic. So what would you think?
It's dynamic. Just like that's the simplest answer. And their TypeScript is kind of like the cousin of JavaScript, where it is static and you declare types and it's more structured, for the reason that people were like, I just can't deal with this JavaScript stuff anymore. It's just too like wild. You can do anything and I want more structure. And so, yeah. SAD4 says no pry either. Correct, but in the lesson plan, if you Command F for pry, you can see like what the alternatives are for pry there, and there's a keyword in JavaScript called debugger that works similarly. So that's like that is honestly where my first not pain point, but like that was one of the first things I asked. I'm like, if I can't pry in and look around using this language, like how am I going to figure anything out? Debugger and then console.log is kind of like puts or p, where it'll just print whatever you want to the screen. Cool. Genevieve, go ahead.
So I guess mine is more of a question. JavaScript, is it a language that can be used? It can be used on both the front end and back end. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So if you're using it on the front end and you also have a different thing like Rails on the back end, how do they interact with each other?
Yeah, that's a good question. So all of our modern browsers are built to execute JavaScript, and they run on JavaScript. I think it's V8 engines, whatever that means. But that's how they're actually like executing code kind of in the background. And that's why you can open up your dev tools and jump into a console and immediately start executing JavaScript. So it's native to modern browsers, and how they interact is a couple of different ways they could interact. So you could have an all Rails backend serves up some data in a JSON format, and then you could have a JavaScript front end that is like React or Vue, whatever, that consumes that JSON and then starts using JavaScript to execute from that point on. It's like, I know what to do with JSON. I'm gonna, request response cycle, where basically the response is JSON, the request is being made from the front end framework in JavaScript. Or if you have a Rails monolith that also like executes, that is like a front end and a back end all in Rails, then what you can do is you can write JavaScript and kind of like serve it up to the browser as part of the asset pipeline. And so you'd serve it up, that it gets kind of compacted into one JavaScript file in the browser, but you kind of you have it more organized on your kind of like backend side, but you pass it to the browser so that now there's a JavaScript file that lives in the browser that you passed over there that can execute JavaScript in the browser without, like, this is your way of avoiding the request response cycle and keeping things in the browser if you want. If it's like, hey, I want to, like, when I click this button, it's not tied to a request anymore. Maybe it's tied to some JavaScript code that just executes in the browser and then changes the display on the page. Is that helpful?
Yes, it was. Thank you.
Cool. That means they go fast. That's correct, Hope. That's kind of like the benefit. You can execute JavaScript in the browser, and this is like where single page applications, if you've heard that like term before, kind of comes in. It's like there's just one page being served up, and then there's a bunch of like micro components that are part of that page that execute in their own kind of little bubble on the page, and this kind of like speeds things up, keeps it's a different architecture style than what we've been doing, where it's like pretty much every time we go back and forth, it's like a new request response cycle. Single page tries to avoid that as much as possible, unless it's like, I need data, I got to go to the back end and get some data from the database, or I got to send some there, and it gets more complex. But single page is kind of like the entire one page for the whole application, and then broken down into little components, which is cool. Jake, go ahead.
Yeah, JavaScript's pretty different in that there's like no class structure or anything like that, right? Like there's
Yeah, it's like it's a different kind of like paradigm for the way that object-oriented programming can be written. So it's like everything is kind of like a duplicate or a clone of a prototype, and a prototype kind of serves as a class. So like you don't have to like really know this too much. Like I was honestly just reading about it like last night a lot, and I was like, I don't know the inner workings of that, but I can tell you it's different than Ruby, where Ruby, everything inherits from this like basic object class structure. It's not like that in JavaScript. JavaScript is OOP. You can declare classes if you want to. You can make them, but like the way that the language is designed is via prototypes of your basic types like array or string or numeric, which like I don't expect y'all to like fully understand. And honestly, it's not like a big thing to worry about unless you're like applying for a front end job and that you're going to be working all in JavaScript. Then you'd probably want to dive deeper. But for the sake of just like knowing that it's slightly different, it's different than the structure of OOP and Ruby. That's what I want you to know. Cool. Any other thoughts, questions, concerns, ideas? Actually, I want to say a couple things. I said the thing about the browser. Yeah, there's in the lesson plan, it kind of goes through how to open the dev tools. I think y'all are pretty aware of that. But I think one of the best places to try out JavaScript code is just like in the browser, immediate feedback in that console in the dev tools, which is great. Otherwise, you can execute it locally and run it in a JavaScript file. That's fine. But yeah, I think one thing to note about these debugger statements too, that's just like a gotcha, is if the dev tools aren't open, the debugger will not hit. So like you got to have the dev tools open for your debugger to hit. And the whole point of that is like lazy developers leave their debuggers in their code and push it to production. And it's like a way for that not to like screw anything up for the average user that doesn't have the dev tools open. What else do I want to say? Yeah, JavaScript can be written. I mean, mostly it's an object-oriented scripting language, but it can be written functionally. And what you want to understand about functional programming is it's stateless, kind of like HTTP is stateless, even though you can kind of manipulate it to be to have some sort of state. And the idea there is like, hey, no matter what inputs you put into this function, it's going to work the same way every time. So you don't have to have anything except for a function that inputs a few parameters and outputs a result. And no matter what, that is going to behave the same way every time. There's no like in opposition to the idea of a class that holds some state, and you don't know what. Hopefully you do know, but sometimes you might not know what the state is of a class at any given time, and it's manipulatable. So that class can look different over time. Functional programming, like the paradigm is, hey, we write functions one way and we expect them to behave that exact same way forever. And that's the idea there. Kyle, go ahead.
I'm just curious, does debugger work only within functions, or can you just put that in any part of a JS file and it'll hit?
That's a good question. I don't remember. I would try it and see if you can hit it at the main scope or not. But I honestly don't remember, but like try it. See if you can hit it in the outer scope or not. I'm not positive. Okay, anonymous question came in. Would you need to use JavaScript if you wanted real-time functions on your view page? Yeah, so that is like the benefit, really. It's like, okay, I have a view or I have something that lives in the browser, and now I have some code attached to like a specific part of my view that like can run and circumvent the request response cycle. And like I've declared a function, I've passed that to the browser too. It is attached to like some class or some element. And when I do something to that some class or some element, like now it's going to respond based on, what event happened on the page. And then that is happening all in the browser, so all on the client side. So yeah, fast. Okay, I think that's all I wanted to say. And yeah, let's do independent time. I want to give y'all, how much time do we have left? If we do 30, then we'll have 40 left. Yeah, so let's do 30. Work in your break. It's your time, so work in your break to that 30, and then we'll come back at 11:20 Mountain Standard Time, and we'll kind of like it'll just be more discussion of like, hey, like I found this. You can, like I said, work through the lesson plan. If that's what you want to do, like I want to type, great, go through the lesson plan. A lot of examples to go through. If you want to like more high level, like understand more about JavaScript as a language, go do some research. There's some articles listed. If you want to get better at dev tools, you can work on that. If you want to implement a JS asset in your project, see it get passed to the front end, see how you can manipulate it, do that. That's fine too. Whatever you want right now, you can go get. This is meant to be just like JavaScript Explore time. And then, yeah, we'll do the challenge as kind of like the second half of class. I'm going to be here. You can hop off, you can stay in, whatever you want to do.
So so I'm on this using variables part, and so I have this, and then it says open the console in your browser, blah, blah, blah. Now change the value of your quantity variable and ask the console for the creature count value again. So is it saying like, because if I change quantity to 5, then creature count's going to stay as 3 unicorns.
Well, let's see. So go ahead and just do what you want to do.
So also, do I have to do this let every time I change?
I don't know. Let's try quantity equals 5 without the let and just see what runs. See if it runs or we get an error. Okay, so it looks like no. Looks like the first time you declare it. And then yeah, so we don't want to. So the difference here is like let is basically like the let is kind of like when you're declaring something, but then to call it, you're just calling it, right? Like once it's declared, it like similar. Well, I guess it's not that similar to Ruby. I guess it kind of is. You just call whatever you've named it. So now I would say what creature count. I would just call it, and you have to call it, I believe. Okay, it just works without the parentheses. Usually you need to call it with parentheses. Well, I guess in the browser you don't, but like it's kind of like, oh no, because it's just a variable. Okay. Yeah, so if it was a function, then you need to call it with parentheses, like at the end of creature count. But since it's just a variable, it runs like that. But then, yeah, I see what you're saying. So it's not changing it, which is interesting.
I had to declare that again for it to take effect. So I had to do let creature count equal quantity plus. And then after I did that and called it, it reflected the new.
Yeah.
Because when you're declaring creature count, you're setting it as whatever quantity is at the time. And so you'd have to do a new let to redeclare the variable.
Got it.
With the new quantity.
Got it. Okay, so let's run if you copy paste that bottom line let, see what we get there. I see. Okay, so that's like a scope kind of thing where it's like holding on to the previous version, or then you have to like update it to now take the current version, at least in this like declaring variables world.
Okay. So I was wondering if there was a way to kind of do it like this, or like have define the quantity and then like call creature count again and have it look at the new quantity that I set.
If it was a function and you were passing things in, then it would work that way. But because these are just variables, like honestly, the way that the third line let like works there is kind of like, we generally just like wouldn't do this that often, where we're like declaring a variable that way, because it's like, yeah, it's slightly confusing and slightly like the behavior is slightly different than what you would expect here. So if you were declaring it as a function, which like you'll see kind of like later down, then it would just take whatever you decided to pass in, and it would refer to that. But since it's declared, since the variable was declared above with a different quantity, it's still pointing to that specific quantity, not the quantity you updated on when you put quantity assigned to 5, which is honestly not what I expected either, but that's a kind of a nuance to keep in mind.
Okay, awesome, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Function in the developer console, I can't hit enter or else it like goes straight to return, like to go to the next line. Is there a way to go to the next
Probably
line?
like I would try control enter or shift enter and like see if those just give you the new line.
Shift enter works.
Shift enter. Okay, cool. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. All right, it's 20. So let's come back together. Give you just a second to show me you're with me. All right, so a couple of things that we learned, just if you had it muted or whatever, is shift enter in the console in DevTools gives you a new line. That can be helpful. And then Angel's example that we went through was interesting. It was basically like if you declared a variable that points to the previous version of variables of any other variables, then even if you change those variables, it still points to the previous version, which is not something I would have expected, to be honest. Like that's not how it works in Ruby. So I didn't expect that to happen here, but that's something to note and to like just be aware of, is like if you're changing a variable, but when a different variable was declared that pointed at the previous state of that variable, it still points at that previous state. It doesn't point at the updated state. Okay. Anyone else learn anything interesting, cool, they want to share? Something that maybe they didn't like about JavaScript? Something they did like, I don't know. Yeah, Hope's got a question in the did like nothing. Hope's got this like kind of like thinking out loud question in the chat. I was thinking about that too, but I don't think so, because in the scope of the browser console, like we never changed scopes, right? Like in that console session that Angel and I were going through, like it was still the same scope. We didn't enter a function, we didn't enter a class, we were just in the main scope. So I don't think it was a scope thing. I think it's just like a how variables are set kind of like under the hood and like a pointer thing. Yeah, agreed, Jake. I didn't like that. It was front end. Okay, great. We're on the same team. And here's what I'll say about JavaScript though. Unavoidable in the current context of web development. It's in every browser. It's at every company. It's everywhere. It's like a pandemic that never ended. So you gotta deal with it, and you gotta kind of figure out at least the basics, because you're gonna use them. You're gonna write JavaScript, unless like you get like a pure backend or pure like data SQL job or something. Highly likely you're gonna write JavaScript, or at least you're gonna have to read it, right? You're gonna have to. So that it's unavoidable. That's why I tell people to do the front end program. Just kidding. Okay, so y'all don't have anything else you want to share? Nothing? Yeah, the error messages aren't as nice. Okay, well then great, we'll move on. I want to take till 11:50 on this, and challenge 1, these are like straight from from Code Wars. I did them this morning and was like, these will be good for them. They'll like, I wanted to get warmed up in JavaScript. I went and did a challenge in JavaScript. So that's what we're doing here. So challenge 1, like I said, less spicy, good one to start on. These are at the bottom of the lesson plan. Challenge 2, much more spicy, much more, many more steps there. So I've got y'all in breakout rooms, a couple groups of 3, mostly groups of 2. And
Do you want us to be doing this all just in the console?
I think that this part I would use a file, honestly. Like I think it might be easier to like code through, and then maybe once I have something I think might work, I just I mean, you can run it with Node if you want, or you can just post it in the console, whatever you feel like. But I think I would use a file for these. Like generally, I'd use my editor to type these out, and you don't have to like. It might be a good idea to start with pseudocoding, right? Like, okay, how would I solve this in Ruby? And then let's just go translate the methods, right? Like, let's go translate. There's got to be a method like for like splitting strings, or there's got to be a method for like concatenating or whatever it is. So just, I think that could be a good approach is like pseudocode first, then try to write it in JavaScript. Yeah, we'll come back at 50. We'll share out some examples, and then we'll move on with our lives. But JavaScript will stay with us. Okay, opening them up now. Unless there's any questions about what I'm asking you to do. Okay.
So I've just got this with the debugger right here. I could actually take this out. I don't know if this will give me an error, but I can just type debugger here. And then I will clear that. Then this is in VS Code, by the way, so I don't know if there is a similarity in Atom.
Sure.
But if I go over here and press run and debug with Node.javascript, then I can actually just come straight down here and it loads up that file. And I'm sure this will give me an error because nothing's in it.
It'll just give you undefined, I think.
Yeah, not defined.
Cool.
But that runs straight in there, kind of like Pry, and I thought this was super cool.
So what is that called in VS Code?
In VS Code, all you have to do is you open up your terminal on the bottom.
Yep. Oh, I don't have a built-in terminal. So
yeah, it would be control with the tilde. And then this button over here with the play and the bug on the side, it's like a play button with the bug.
Run and debug.
It's run and debug, and then you just have to select node.js. And then to stop it, you come down here on the call stack and stop.
Okay. It looks like there's a plugin for Atom that I could get.
Yeah, you might be able to figure it out on Atom. This is on VS Code, so I don't really know what that comparison would be on Atom.
Sure.
I'm curious to see if it would work. No, it doesn't. You still have to write debugger in there. You can't just throw like it's kind of like Pry, where if you don't throw Pry in, it won't open. So I don't know. If there is an extension for Atom that allows you to do that, then I totally would.
Yeah, I can't wait to learn all the quirks and idiosyncrasies of another language. That's like the best part.
Did you like you?
So can I show you something? Wait, can I show you something real quick, Trevor? So
yeah, of course.
On the left side, or you?
Oh,
yeah,
shoot.
I wanted this to keep going on your screen.
Yeah, gotcha.
So on the left side, if you put a breakpoint, so if you hover next to that 4 to the left of the line number 4.
Yeah.
See how that red dot shows up? Click that. All right, so now you've set a breakpoint, which is essentially the same thing as a debugger and how most languages
that's
debug
cool.
code. So now if you execute this, let's see if it stops, hopefully. Yeah, so now you're
now
like,
I go to my debug.
Yeah, but I don't know what you have access to at this point, just like scope wise. It looks like
I'll just
see your-
type name.
yeah, you can see your locals.
I don't want an autofill here. Yeah, it works.
Cool.
Oh,
So,
that's
like,
really cool.
So that's like how you in most editors, other languages, this is like essentially what a pry, like this is how pry works. It's just like you stop it with the debugger, or I'm sorry, with the breakpoint, and you can do the same thing. There's like ways to set breakpoints in the Chrome, like in the Chrome console, or in the Chrome, I should say. It's like when you're looking at sources, but it's like if you to the left of the line number is always where it's gonna like be if you hover over it.
That is so cool.
Yeah.
Because now, I mean, that eliminates if we're thinking like at a high level, that eliminates the use of an extra gem in order to debug.
Yeah.
You could just throw it straight in. That's sweet.
Yep.
I love that. That's a great tip. Thank you.
For sure.
Now, my question is, does this have anything to do with React at all? Is JavaScript like included with React when you're writing in React?
React is built on JavaScript, essentially.
Okay.
So React is like, you can think like Ruby, or Rails is built on Ruby. React's built on JavaScript. So like you run JavaScript with React, but React has like, a framework with like a router and like a way to, go fetch requests, and, it's got things it's got domain specific language to React, and you can like run JavaScript the same way you would in a .js file in a React framework.
Nice. That's awesome. That is great. I did want to start to get a little bit into React, hopefully towards the end of this project, and messing around with it maybe.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about learning new stuff is it's not something that's going to like get you the job, right? Like it's not gonna like, people aren't gonna be like, oh, you spent 7 months in Ruby and Rails and then like a week in React, like we're gonna hire you for our React stuff. It's like, but the more that you do it, like the more you jump into new languages, new frameworks, and kind of like poke around and debug and like kind of flex those uncomfortable muscles, the easier it becomes to do that for anything, right? Honestly, like at some point, I don't know when it happens, when it happened to me or when it will happen to y'all, it just kind of all looks the same. And like there's slight nuances you have to know about with every language, but like the way that you like dig in and debug and, play around, call things, and start to like pick things up, it's all kind of the same. It really is.
Yeah.
It's like they're all just tools to do similar things.
Right. We actually did something similar. I think Dominic did the same thing because we were both in the with Sovereign for our job shadow. And they threw us straight into Java, and it was incredibly uncomfortable.
Yep.
But it was a great experience because it was the first time for me, at least, where I felt like, yeah, I've never written Java before, but I could look at it and still comprehend it and look at what was going on. It just took me a minute to see, okay, like it was weird because I was seeing a lot of single line syntax, and that just was odd to me. I'm not used to single line syntax, but it clicked pretty quickly. I mean, obviously not a Java master or anything, but it was cool to experience that type of shift in a language.
Yeah, definitely. I had a different experience. I understood what they were doing with things, but I had no clue why they were calling things. I was like, what is that? That word doesn't mean anything to me yet. And then luckily the developer kind of explained it to me. And then he related it always like to something in Ruby. And he was like, this is just like that concept. I was like, oh, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, that's really helpful when you can draw a parallel, especially when you're first picking it up. So like that's why I said I'm like pseudocode in Ruby, so that then you can draw the parallel in JavaScript if you can. And it's like, okay, what do I need to do here? I need to like, split I need to split a string by a space, like add its space. So it's like you know how to do that in Ruby. Like now you just go look at how you do that in JavaScript. It's just a different tool for doing the same thing.
Yeah.
Sure.
And that's very similar too, because we had a coding challenge with our shadow, our shadower, and he actually had us do the challenge in Ruby and then showed us how to translate that to Java. And he said he's never written in Ruby before. And I was like, that type of knowledge of being able to see a language you haven't seen before and then translate it back was something that, like you said, with the pseudocode, is going to be something I choose to do if I ever get stuck in a situation where I have to code something else. I'll just write it in Ruby first and then figure out how to merge that over, because that helps me get my thought process out a little more.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's like a good way to start. It's like start, pseudocode, write it how you would in Ruby, and then you just go look up how to do it in whatever language you need to learn. It's just syntax after that.
Right. Cool.
Rock. I might have you share, Trevor. I might have you share the breakpoint thing.
Hello, JavaScript enthusiasts. Looks like people had fun. Anyone come up with a solution that worked and that you want to show for maybe the first one? Or yeah, okay, cool. Joseph, go ahead.
Yeah, I did this for the first one. So just split it.
Talk me through line by line. Let's start with one.
For sure. So I am declaring a variable name here with my name, and then I'm creating a function. And then I take in the name as an argument. I don't really know how to describe this. I guess you're just going in.
Yeah.
This is defining the function itself or what lives in it.
Totally. So let me just technical language stop you for line 2. So on line 2, you're declaring a function called convert name to initials that takes a parameter n. When you are passing the name on line 8, that is when convert name to initials is taking the argument name.
Fair enough. Yes. Cool. All right. So I'm declaring another variable name here, which equals in, and that'll split the string by a space.
Can I stop you one more time?
Yeah.
Just so I didn't follow up on your comment about the brackets, so I just want to follow up there. So the brackets, you're basically enclosing the scope of this function with those curly brackets that start at the end of line 2 and then end on line 6, and that's like that's declaring the scope of this function. And then on line 3, this is like a pet, I don't know if it's a pet peeve. It'll help you if you start saying it this way. I had to start saying it this way when I began teaching, just to be very clear in mod 1. Like when you are saying let's split name and then you're calling the equals operator and then assign, you're not saying it's equal to n.split, you're assigning it to the value of n.split. So just like a little nuance there of like, anytime you're assigning, say assigning, don't say I'm setting it equal to, because equals is like the comparison.
Yeah. Cool. All right, perfect. And then I am declaring initials, and I am assigning, so I'm taking split name, I'm mapping over each element of the array, which is now going to be Joe and Budina. So there's 2 elements in there, 2 strings. Then I am declaring a new function in this map. I am taking each element, which I've named name. I am returning the first index or 0 index of each element, then I am joining those by the space.
Love it. That's great. Great job with the technical language there. And yeah, this is certainly one way to do it with map. You're basically like, hey, I need the first character, right, of my strings, and then I need that to be returned as an array. So basically kind of like within all this one line before we hit the join, what we get back is a J and a B within the array at that point. Then we call join. And then, yeah, you console.log that initial so that we can see it. So how'd you run this?
I just ran node and then I gave it the file name, and I am in my JS folder here.
Cool. So one thing to note about the spec on this is we wanted a period between the J and the B.
Dang it.
That's okay. I think you might be able to get this to work still if you put a period in your join string. Cool. That's great. And then the problem with this still though is we didn't take into account the scenario where the first letters of name are lowercase and they're not already uppercased. So if it was Joe Bedina with lowercase j and b, then we'd have to have a way to uppercase them before we gave it this output. But this is great. I still think you did a great job. This is JavaScript, new language, and I appreciate you sharing.
Perfect.
Got some hands up. Hope, go ahead.
I wanted to show how I tackled the first problem.
Yeah, let's see it. I need it to be larger, just FYI.
That is like this.
Can you keep going, please?
Oh.
Cool, thank you.
So
okay. Talk me through it.
I assigned name above. It is the same as it's Sam Harris.
Okay.
Like that. All I did was assign the function with the name shortener test4 because I was still testing all this stuff. It takes an argument called name. And then within the block, I assign the variable split name to the value of name.split split by a space.
Which gives us what at that point?
That should give me an array with the pieces Sam and Harris.
Perfect.
So then I just tell it to print split name, the first item in the array, the first letter of that item, and then uppercase that. Join it with the period, and then join it again with split name's second array item with the first letter that's also been uppercased.
Cool. Love it. And so a cool thing about this that you could even talk about is when you do this bracket notation here on split name, first thing that it's doing is it's getting the 0 index of the array. Then you have a string at that point, and then it's getting the 0 index of the string, which is the first letter. This is like a great example of polymorphism, right? You're calling the same method, bracket notation 0, on 2 different elements, and it's able to work the same way in this case, but on 2 different data types. So this would be like a good polymorph. This is like honestly the simplest example of polymorphism that you could point to if you're asked about it in an interview. Cool. That's great. Other questions? Adam, I saw you had your hand up, then you put it down. Anything you wanted to add? Oh,
I just did that on accident then.
Okay, cool. Great. Yeah, and we're not gonna get it. Actually, did anyone get the second solution that they want to show?
I just got it up and running.
Okay, cool. Let's see it, Jake.
Well, it was mostly with the help of Eric and Adam.
Cool.
But I kind of cheated a little bit because if you give 5, hey, stop it, it's not going to work.
Okay.
But we have let likes 1 is equal to this array, 2, 3, 4, and then display likes 1, 2, 3, and then let's try putting this in here, and now that should work. And you're just passing in the array, and if it's equal to 1, you do this. If it's 2, this, 3, this, 4, this. My JavaScript skills are not great, but else if works this way versus else if, and you just kind of concatenate along as you go. It's really ugly.
Cool. And so are you just using this stack blitz to basically just run it for you so that you can just run it here in one window?
Yeah, StackBlitz is really awesome like that. It's just a website that you can use. It's got like JS, Ruby, Rails, React, a whole bunch of stuff.
Cool.
A whole bunch of languages that you can just come in here and like practice stuff on.
Awesome.
That's how I taught myself a bunch of stuff. And then you can print stuff to the screen through like an HTML window over here. Or if you go in JavaScript, like it has a little console that'll pop up here automatically.
Nice. Cool.
Yep.
Cool tool for
so
just kind of jumping in and getting some code that you can just quickly execute. So that's cool.
Yeah.
I'm familiar with that.
Yeah, this is what, yeah, exactly correct. So yeah, anyways, and then yeah, the .to uppercase up here to uppercase if this name is lowercase.
Awesome. All right. Appreciate y'all showing that. The point of this was to get y'all typing some JavaScript. It was not to have a perfect solution or a complete solution. It was type some JavaScript, get it to run. All right, that's it. The class survey is in the calendar link if you want to take that. And okay, one thing I'm going to say real quick that I wanted to say about squishies. So Jesus and Diana.
That was bad.
That was fantastic.
That was a great place to freeze.
I froze, obviously. Can you hear me now? Cool. So thanks for signing up for squishies. No one signed up yesterday, and like I'm not offended. Like I said, they're optional. Here's what I will tell you. A Mod 4 student, that's current Mod 4 student, checked in with me twice, like for, I don't know, 30 minutes, like advocated for himself, advocated for my time. And I gave it to him and told him like, this is how the job hunt went for me. Like, you're probably ready to start applying now. I wouldn't apply necessarily. I would backdoor it and cold outreach to the places that you're interested in. And today, him and I have let me just be clear. He did all the work. He just took my encouragement and went with it. And today he and I have a meeting to celebrate that he got a job. So,
hell yes. Who was it?
Samuel.
Oh, hell yeah.
Yeah, Sam.
Out in Irvine, I think he said.
Yep. So all I did was just tell him my experience and encourage him that like, hey, you're ready. Like I'm telling you, you're ready to go get it. Go get it. And here's what I would do in these situations. And he kind of like followed up a couple times, and successful outcome that I'm excited about for him. So that's what I'll say about one-on-one time. It can be useful. All right. I'll let y'all go with that.
Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, Tim.